Welcome to this explainer. We are jumping right into one of the most consequential periods in modern tech history. I'm talking about the final week of May 2026. In literally just 7 days, global digital infrastructure didn't just get a patch or an update, it underwent a massive foundational reordering. So let's explore the data, the architecture, and the incredible market shifts that really define this historic crucible together.
The research points to a pretty stark reality here. The era of the chatbot, that fun conversational novelty we've all been playing around with for the last few years, is officially dead. What replaced it? Well, something far more powerful, highly lucrative, and honestly, infinitely more dangerous. We've officially crossed the threshold into autonomous, long-horizon agentic systems. We are in the era of structural enterprise integration.
Here's how we're breaking it down today. First, the machine speed era, then the valuation inversion, followed by long-horizon autonomous execution. After that, we'll look at machine speed cyber warfare and finally wrap up with securing the algorithmic future. Okay, let's dive into this.
Part 1. The machine speed era, the foundation shift. To really understand the gravity of late May 2026, we first have to grasp an entirely new paradigm of software development. What we're looking at is a total, ground-up shift in developer workflows. Up until this point, developers were doing a lot of what we called vibe coding, basically using natural language to scaffold multi-step logic. But the events of late May pushed us way past that. Developers aren't just guiding text generators anymore. Now they're essentially middle managers orchestrating a workforce of autonomous agents. The model itself has literally become the execution engine.
Moving to part 2, the valuation inversion, the money. With that massive architectural shift came a dramatic financial reordering of the entire tech industry. This was the exact moment enterprise compliance officially defeated consumer hype.
$965 billion. Let that massive number just sink in for a second. On May 28, 2026, Anthropic announced a staggering $65 billion Series H funding round. And this wasn't just cash. This included deep vertical integration with hyperscalers and chipmakers to completely secure their physical supply chain. That capitalization catapulted their post-money valuation to nearly $1 trillion.
Now, what's really interesting here is the violent restructuring of the financial hierarchy. Back in March 2026, OpenAI was sitting pretty at an $852 billion valuation, with Anthropic trailing at about $380 billion. Just 2 months later, Anthropic leaps to $965 billion, dethroning OpenAI entirely. And this wasn't some slow, gradual transition. It was driven purely by enterprise revenue velocity, hitting a massive $47 billion run rate by late May.
The underlying driver behind that flip is absolutely fascinating. A 2026 communications study actually exposed a huge asymmetry in the market. OpenAI had 20 times the consumer users and absolute media dominance, but Anthropic, they won the revenue war. The study found this founder reputation gap. Turns out the loudest, most highly publicized founders actually correlated with the weakest corporate trust. Because at the end of the day, corporate boards don't care how many podcast interviews a CEO does, right? They care about data privacy and predictable execution.
And that enterprise dominance was really cemented with the release of Claude Opus 4.8. If you look at the benchmarks, you see very deliberate structural improvements. Agent decoding jumped nearly 5%. But here is the absolutely crucial detail. Anthropic deliberately abandoned open-ended creative generation. Opus 4.8 isn't an artist, it is a highly regulated, rigorous compliance officer.
So, the architectural secret behind Opus 4.8 is this paradigm called calibrated uncertainty. The model actively hedges. It explicitly flags its own logic flaws and just flat-out refuses ambiguous tasks. It's actually only a quarter as likely to miss defects in its own code compared to its predecessor. Think about it. If your health records or bank accounts are being managed by AI, this strict guardrail system is exactly why major networks adopted it instantly. It completely prioritizes truth over helpfulness.
All right, part 3. Long-horizon autonomous execution, the muscle. Because while the West was fighting over corporate valuations and compliance, we absolutely have to shift our focus to the East. Out of Hangzhou, Alibaba Cloud delivered a breakthrough that completely redefined the boundaries of compute.
35 hours. This is the endurance metric that changed the game. Alibaba released Qwen 3.7 Max. This was an autonomous foundational model tasked with optimizing a computing kernel for a Zhenwu M890 chip, which was a hardware architecture it had literally never seen before.
With zero human intervention, the agent ran continuously for 35 hours. It made over 1,100 tool calls, recovered from midterm logic crises, and actually produced a production-grade kernel that outperformed the human-engineered version by 10x. No way a human team does that in a day and a half.
So Qwen 3.7 Max isn't just a chatbot, it is a literal multi-day workforce. It's got this massive 1 million token memory retention and extreme throughput hitting over 200 output tokens per second. And brilliantly, it features native interoperability with OpenAI and Anthropic APIs to subvert vendor lock-in. Plus, it's aggressively priced at just $2.50 per million input tokens. It's an absolute economic powerhouse.
But we have to look at the geopolitical reality here. Historically, Alibaba championed a unified open-source ecosystem with the earlier Qwen series. But with 3.7 Max, they executed a pretty contentious pivot to a fully proprietary closed-weight model tied heavily to Alibaba Cloud. Objectively speaking, because Western defense and financial sectors face strict data sovereignty regulations, they are severely restricted from using it. This fundamentally fractures the global digital development space, leaving Eastern and Western engineering teams increasingly reliant on entirely distinct, siloed autonomous ecosystems.
Part 4. Machine Speed Cyber Warfare, the Militarization. This brings us to the systemic danger phase of our explainer. Because as these models achieve the capacity to reason through complex code and operate external tools, they inadvertently became the most potent offensive cyber weapons in history.
What we saw was the total collapse of the traditional exploit window. The sheer scale of the threat is staggering. During an internal initiative called Project Glasswing, Anthropic's gated Mythos model autonomously scanned open-source repositories and found over 23,000 security flaws. At the same time, threat actors were developing frameworks like VoidLink and PromptLock, which are malware and ransomware assembled entirely by AI. The perimeter was failing, and the traditional time frame between vulnerability detection and patching collapsed from weeks down to literally minutes.
The response to this required an industrial-scale defense mobilization. To survive machine speed attacks, Google had to abandon those old static vulnerability spreadsheets and build an integrated reasoning stack. The architecture is wild. Gemini provides the autonomous reasoning. Wiz provides the live architectural context. Mandiant injects real-time threat intelligence. And finally, CodeMender autonomously generates the fixes. Manual human triage completely replaced.
At the code level, Google's philosophy centers on contextual reachability. Look, human security teams were absolutely drowning in alert fatigue. Google's platform solves this by basically asking one simple question: can a hacker actually reach this flaw from the public internet? If it's isolated behind secure walls, the system automatically lowers the priority. Defenders only spend compute and time fixing what is truly exposed. Which leads us to Part 5, securing the algorithmic future. Because securing corporate cloud networks just isn't enough if the very foundation of the digital economy, the open-source supply chain itself, remains vulnerable. To tackle this, IBM and Red Hat launched Project Lightwell, which was a staggering $5 billion initiative. They mobilized 20,000 engineers equipped with agentic security. The real technical brilliance here, though, is zero source access. It operates entirely on dependency manifests, like pom.xml files. That's essentially just the public ingredient list of the software. It finds an upstream bug, autonomously generates a patch, human engineers validate it, and then it backports the fix directly to the client's exact legacy environment. And it does all of this without ever once looking at the client's proprietary code.
And the market response? Instantaneous. Bank of America, Citi, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase. This rapid adoption across Wall Street proves a critical point. AI-driven supply chain security is no longer an optional luxury. For the most heavily regulated entities on Earth, it is now an existential operational requirement.
Yet all of this mobilization has created a pretty fascinating cultural friction. We're seeing a massive divide between executive relief and developer anxiety. Boardrooms are thrilled, obviously, that vulnerabilities can be patched at scale instantly, but volunteer open-source maintainers, they're terrified. They fear that upstreaming thousands of algorithmic pull requests is going to fundamentally overwhelm the fragile, human-led governance structures of the open-source community, just totally drowning them in automated code reviews. Which leaves us with a definitive takeaway from the crucible of May 2026. The tech sector has confirmed that the future of digital infrastructure and security is an asymmetric battle, fought entirely by algorithms. So I'll leave you with this question to rethink your entire strategy. In this new paradigm, are you building for human speed novelty
or machine speed survival? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer.